Africa has seen empires rise, nations reborn, and leaders hailed as heroes, only to be struck down by bullets, betrayal, and bloody coups. From midnight ambushes to broad daylight assassinations, these are not just deaths, they are warnings. In this countdown, we uncovered 20 African presidents who were assassinated in the most dangerous, shocking, and politically explosive ways. Some died in silence, others sparked wars, all left a scar on history. At number 20 is Sylvanus Epifanio Olympio. He was Togo's first president after independence in 1960. Olympio tried to reduce French influence and refused to integrate ex-French soldiers into the national army. That decision proved fatal. In the early hours of January 13, 1963, a group of disgruntled soldiers broke into his home. Olympio fled toward the U.S. Embassy, but just steps from the gate, he was shot dead by Sergeant Etienne Gnassingbé Ayadema, the man who would later become president. It was the first coup in post-colonial Francophone Africa and the first African president to be assassinated in office. At number 19 is Laurent Désiré Kabila. He became president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1997 after overthrowing Mobutu Sese Seko during the First Congo War. But power came with enemies. By 2001, Kabila had turned against his Rwandan and Ugandan backers. On January 16th, during a meeting inside his palace, one of his own bodyguards drew a pistol and shot him at point-blank range. Kabila died hours later on the operating table. His assassination remains shrouded in mystery, but many believe it was orchestrated by foreign interests and internal rivals angry over his nationalist policies. At number 18 is Juvenal Habyarimana. He ruled Rwanda for over 20 years after taking power in a 1973 military coup. His regime was marked by ethnic favoritism and simmering tensions between Hutus and Tutsis. On April 6, 1994, while flying back to Kigali, his plane was shot down by surface-to-air missiles near the airport. The crash killed him instantly. What followed was catastrophic. Within hours, Rwanda descended into one of the deadliest genocides in modern history. Habyarimana's assassination remains unresolved, with blame shifting between rebel forces and elements within his own government. At number 17 is Cyprien Ntaryamira. He was a Hutu politician who became president of Burundi in February 1994, following the assassination of his predecessor, Melchior Ndadaye. His rise came at a tense time, with deep ethnic divisions between Hutus and Tutsis threatening to tear the country apart. Barely 2 months into his presidency, Ntaryamira traveled to Rwanda for a regional summit. On April 6, 1994, he boarded the same presidential jet as Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana to return to Kigali. As the plane descended, it was struck by 2 surface-to-air missiles, crashing just outside the airport. Everyone on board was killed instantly. The attack didn't just claim 2 presidents, it ignited a firestorm. Within hours, the Rwandan genocide began, and ethnic massacres erupted in Burundi. Ntaryamira's death became one of the most explosive political assassinations in African history. At number 16 is Marien Ngouabi, a military officer turned Marxist revolutionary. Ngouabi became president of the Republic of the Congo in 1969 after leading a leftist uprising that overthrew the existing regime. He declared the country Africa's first Marxist-Leninist state, aligning closely with the Soviet Union and clamping down on all political opposition. But enemies were gathering both inside and outside his ranks. On March 18, 1977, Ngouabi was gunned down inside his presidential palace in Brazzaville. Official reports claimed he was killed by a suicide commando, but many believe it was the result of a well-planned internal conspiracy, possibly backed by foreign interests angered by his refusal to support French influence in oil-rich Cabinda. His assassination sent shockwaves through the country, leading to a swift purge of military rivals and the execution of several officials accused of involvement. At number 15 is Patrice Lumumba. He was the first prime minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a fierce nationalist, and one of the most iconic figures in Africa's struggle against colonialism. After leading the Congo to independence from Belgium in 1960, Lumumba's calls for true sovereignty and his refusal to align with Western interests made him a marked man. Within months, the country descended into chaos. A coup led by Colonel Joseph Mobutu removed Lumumba from power. He was arrested, beaten, and eventually transferred to the breakaway province of Katanga, where he was executed by firing squad on January 17, 1961, with Belgian and Western backing. His body was dissolved in acid to prevent a grave from becoming a shrine. Decades later, Belgium formally apologized for its role in his death. But for many Africans, Lumumba remains a martyr of Pan-Africanism, a symbol of what Africa lost to foreign interference and betrayal. At number 14 is Thomas Sankara. Known as Africa's Che Guevara, Sankara was a revolutionary soldier who became president of Burkina Faso at just 33, following a 1983 coup. Charismatic and radical, he renamed the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, Land of Upright People. Sankara launched sweeping reforms, land redistribution, women's rights, anti-corruption campaigns, and a bold rejection of foreign aid. But his revolution made powerful enemies at home and abroad. On October 15, 1987, during a meeting at the presidential palace, he was assassinated along with 12 aides in a sudden coup led by his close ally Blaise Compaoré. It was swift, brutal, and silent, his body buried in an unmarked grave for years. Many believe foreign governments, including France, had a hand in his downfall. Despite his short rule, Sankara remains an enduring icon of African independence and integrity. His death, a painful reminder of what happens when a leader refuses to bow. At number 13 is Francois Tombalbaye. He became the first president of Chad after independence from France in 1960 and quickly turned into an authoritarian ruler. As discontent grew, he imposed forced labor policies and tribalist reforms, including mandating traditional rights like Yondo initiation, even for civil servants. This only fueled deeper resentment. On April 13, 1975, after years of political repression and ethnic tensions, a group of army officers stormed the presidential palace in N'Djamena. Tombalbaye was captured, beaten, and fatally shot during the coup. He died inside the palace he once ruled with an iron fist. His death marked the beginning of a long period of instability in Chad, setting a precedent for the cycle of coups and assassinations that would plague the country for decades. At number 12 is Amilcar Cabral, a revolutionary thinker, agronomist, and freedom fighter. Cabral led the struggle for independence in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. He co-founded the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, PAIGC, and became one of the most respected anti-colonial leaders in Africa. But not all enemies came from abroad. On January 20th, 1973, just months before Guinea-Bissau declared independence, Cabral was shot dead in Conakry, Guinea's capital, by members of his own movement, allegedly with help from Portuguese intelligence. The killers were once trusted comrades, now turned conspirators. His assassination shocked liberation movements across Africa and the world. Though he never lived to see full independence, Cabral's writings and ideals lived on, cementing him as a martyr of African liberation and a symbol of betrayal from within. At number 11 is Samora Machel. He was the first president of independent Mozambique, a fearless revolutionary who led the fight against Portuguese colonial rule through the Frelimo movement. After independence in 1975, Machel launched bold socialist reforms and aligned closely with the Soviet Union and other anti-apartheid movements. But his growing influence angered the apartheid regime in South Africa. On October 19, 1986, Machel's Tupolev Tu-134 aircraft mysteriously crashed near the South African border, killing him and 33 others. Investigations revealed the plane was lured off course by a false navigational beacon, a tactic widely suspected to be orchestrated by South Africa's apartheid-era military. The crash site became a symbol of sabotage and regional betrayal. Even today, his death remains shrouded in controversy, with many believing it was an assassination disguised as an accident. Samora Machel died fighting for Southern Africa's freedom, but some say he was killed for being too fearless. At number 10 is João Bernardo Vieira. Nicknamed Nino, he was a towering figure in Guinea-Bissau's post-independence history, serving as both military leader and president, in a career marked by coups, comebacks, and conflict, but his end was as violent as his rise. On March 2, 2009, just hours after the Army Chief of Staff, General Batista Tagme Nawai, was assassinated in a bomb blast, Vieira was attacked in his home by renegade soldiers. They dragged him from his residence and gunned him down in the street, in what the military described as a revenge killing. The scene was brutal. The symbolism is even worse: the president of a nation killed by his own army. Though Vieira had survived earlier coups and exiles, he couldn't escape the deep divisions he once helped fuel. His assassination plunged Guinea-Bissau further into a spiral of military power plays, political instability, and narco-trafficking. A president murdered not by foreign hands, but by his own. At number 9 is Modibo Keïta. The first president of Mali, Keïta was a Pan-Africanist visionary who led his country to independence from France in 1960. A firm believer in African socialism, he nationalized industries, cut ties with the West, and pushed Mali toward a self-reliant path. But bold ideas come with powerful enemies. In 1968, Keïta was overthrown in a military coup led by Lieutenant Moussa Traoré. Stripped of power, Keïta was imprisoned without trial for nearly a decade, isolated, silenced, and denied medical care. On May 16, 1977, while still in detention, he mysteriously died. Officially, it was natural causes, but many believe he was slowly poisoned or deliberately neglected until his death. No investigation, no justice, just silence. Modibo Keïta didn't die in a hail of bullets, but in the shadows of a prison cell, quietly eliminated by the very regime he once tried to reform. At number 8 is Ibrahim Barre Mainissara, a military man turned president. Mainissara seized power in Niger through a 1996 coup, ousting the country's first democratically elected leader. He promised reform, but quickly turned authoritarian, rigging elections, jailing opponents, and ruling with an iron fist. But his grip on power was short-lived. On April 9, 1999, while at Diori Hamani International Airport in Niamey, Mainissara was ambushed and gunned down by members of his own presidential guard. Reports say his convoy was sprayed with bullets, leaving him dead on the tarmac. No trial, no arrests, just silence and a quick transition of power. It was an assassination cloaked as a military accident. His death marked yet another bloody chapter in Niger's political instability, a warning that those who rise by the gun can also fall by it. At number 7 is Mohamed Boudiaf. One of the original architects of Algeria's independence, Boudiaf spent decades in exile after falling out with the post-colonial regime. But in 1992, amid civil unrest and a rising Islamist insurgency, he was called back from Morocco to help stabilize the country-appointed president by the military-backed regime. It was supposed to be a new beginning, but just 4 months into office, on June 29, 1992, while addressing a crowd in Annaba, Boudiaf was shot at close range by one of his own bodyguards, a lieutenant in the Special Forces. The assassin walked up during a live speech and opened fire, killing Boudiaf instantly and injuring several others. The nation watched in horror, the president murdered on live television. The official story blamed Islamic extremists, but many suspected it was an inside job, orchestrated by factions within the military who feared Boudiaf's anti-corruption crusade. He returned as a savior, he died as a martyr, and the truth about his death remains buried in Algeria's darkest files. At number 6 is Abdurrashid Ali Sharmark. The second president of Somalia, Sharmarki was a respected diplomat and a unifying figure during a fragile period of post-independence politics. He advocated for democratic governance, Pan-African solidarity, and Somali unity at a time when the young nation was walking a political tightrope. But his leadership was cut short in a moment that shocked the nation. On October 15, 1969, while on an official visit to Las Anad, Sharmark was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards, who calmly walked up and shot him at close range with a rifle. No motive was officially given. No explanation was ever made public. Just 5 days later, Major General Siad Barre seized power in a military coup, plunging Somalia into decades of dictatorship and eventual collapse. Sharmark's killing was swift, silent, and suspicious. A president brought down not by foreign enemies, but by a bullet from within his trusted circle, paving the way for a dark era that would haunt Somalia for generations. At number 5 is Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi. Nigeria's first military head of state, state, Aguiyi Ironsi came to power after a violent coup in January 1966, which left the civilian government in ruins. A calm and disciplined general, he tried to unify the country by abolishing regional powers and centralizing authority, but his decree backfired. Many in the north saw his actions as ethnically biased, especially since the previous coup had eliminated mostly northern leaders. Tensions exploded, and just 6 months later, on July 29, 1966, a counter-coup was launched. Aguiyi Ironsi was staying at Government House in Ibadan, hosted by Lieutenant Colonel Francis Adekunle Fajuyi. In the early hours, mutinous northern soldiers stormed the residence, abducted both men, and brutally executed them in a nearby forest. They were tortured and riddled with bullets, their bodies left as a message. It was not just an assassination, it was the spark that ignited Nigeria's descent into civil war, forever altering the nation's history. Aguiyi Ironsi died trying to hold a fragile union together, only to be destroyed by the very divisions he hoped to heal. At number 4 is Richard Ratsamandrava, a former colonel in the Malagasy army. Ratsamandrava was seen as a man of reform firm, nationalist, and eager to end Madagascar's cycle of coups and foreign dependence. He became head of state on February 5, 1975, following the resignation of General Gabriel Ramanantsoa. Hopes were high, but the dream barely had time to breathe. Just 6 days later, on February 11th, while returning home in his car, Ratsamandrava was ambushed and gunned down on the streets of Antananarivo. The official version blamed the Republican security forces, Group Mobile de Police, which had just been disbanded by his government. But many believed the killing was far deeper, a conspiracy involving rival factions within the military and political elite, desperate to regain control. His assassination plunged Madagascar into chaos, forcing the country into military rule and halting the democratic transition he sought to lead. Ratsamandrava was the shortest-serving African head of state, but his murder cast a long shadow, marking a chilling chapter of betrayal and lost hope in Malagasy politics. At number 3 is Abeid Amani Karume, Zanzibar revolution that overthrew the Arab-dominated Sultanate. He later helped merge Zanzibar with Tanganyika to form what we now know as Tanzania, becoming its vice president. But in the shadows of that historic union, enemies were brewing. On April 7, 1972, while playing a regular game of bow at the Zanzibar Revolutionary Council headquarters in Stone Town, Karume was shot multiple times at close range by 4 gunmen, all reportedly members of the army. The attack was swift, surgical, and public. The assassins escaped in the chaos, and though several suspects were later arrested and executed, the true masterminds behind the plot were never officially revealed. Some whispered it was political revenge. Others blamed internal party power struggles within the ruling Afro-Shirazi party. Karume's killing sent shockwaves through both Zanzibar and mainland Tanzania, deepening mistrust and heightening security fears across the new union. His legacy remains controversial, a liberator to some, an autocrat to others, but his assassination proved that even revolutionary icons weren't safe from bullets fired within their own revolutions. At number 2 is Melchior Ndadaye, the first democratically elected president of Burundi and the first from the Hutu ethnic majority. Ndadaye's 1993 election was a historic breakthrough in a nation long dominated by the Tutsi elite. Young, visionary, and beloved by the people, he symbolized a new dawn for Burundi, a promise of unity after years of ethnic division, but the hope did not last. On October 21, 1993, barely 3 months into his presidency, Ndadaye was kidnapped by Tutsi-dominated army officers during a violent coup attempt. He was taken to a military camp, humiliated, and then brutally murdered, stabbed and shot to death in cold blood. His death triggered one of the bloodiest civil wars in African history, claiming over 300,000 lives in the years that followed. Ndadaye's assassination was not just a political murder, it was a national tragedy, a deliberate act of sabotage against democracy, and a chilling reminder of how deeply rooted divisions can shatter even the most hopeful beginnings. He died as a martyr for peace, for democracy, and for a Burundi that never got the chance to fully rise with him. At number 1 is Murtala Ramat Mohammed, bold, fearless, uncompromising. Murtala Muhammad was a Nigerian general who seized power in 1975, sweeping into leadership with a fiery anti-corruption crusade and an iron will to reform. In just 6 months, he slashed government spending, reshaped the civil service, and earned the love of ordinary Nigerians. But his boldness made him enemies. On the morning of February 13, 1976, while en route to work in an unarmored black Mercedes, his convoy was ambushed in Lagos. At a traffic stop near Ikoyi, a group of dissident soldiers led by Lieutenant Colonel Bukasuka Dimka opened fire in broad daylight. Murtala was shot dead instantly, along with his aide-de-camp and driver. It was a calculated and high-profile hit executed with military precision and caught the entire nation off guard. The coup ultimately failed, but the damage was done. Murtala's assassination sent Nigeria into mourning. The streets fell silent. His image became a national symbol. To this day, many still wonder what Nigeria might have become had he lived. A lion silenced before his roar could echo across Africa. That wraps up your countdown of 20 African presidents who were assassinated in the most dangerous ways.